Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how the Conservatives are constantly trying to hint that the general election will be in autumn, how it's fairly obvious attempts to wrong-foot Labour, but also how the economic news this Thursday may well put Sunak in a very, very difficult position. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So the Tories are still trying to convince us that the election is intended to be held in autumn. The latest via the Tories version of Lord Haw-Haw, Harry Cole of the Sun, is that, the November election is probably out of the question. Oh, really? Due to security concerns of being vulnerable to the Kremlin cyber warfare if we go at roughly the same time as the Americans. So Cole is trying to persuade us that the election will be in October, that the Tories will have to abandon their conference, but never mind because the donations have been rolling in. In reality, the £16.5 million haul in the last 4 months that Cole is boasting about, which sounds impressive on the face of it, but it includes a single £10 million donation via the will of a recently deceased donor. They cannot think they're going to be bringing in 16.5 million a quarter now. It's actually realistically 6.5 million, unless there's a load of Tory donors about to die and they've left similar amounts in their will. So basically, they've had £6.5 million of donations and a one-off windfall. Also, they're spending a lot of money at the moment. A lot. There was a bit of an acceleration of social media ad spending in the new year, which seems to be being sustained. Quite a lot of it centred on Rishi Sunak's personal accounts rather than the general Conservative Party ones as well. But the point is, they're spending hand over fist as if the election were weeks away, not another 8 or 9 months. So it's hard to see how the Tories fool Labour into thinking the election is really planned for autumn. Because Labour MPs remember 2017. Theresa May insisted she would not call a snap election. And Labour decided to believe her. So when she did call the snap election, they were caught out. They hadn't been preparing, didn't even have a manifesto to go. So they had to hastily edit Ed Miliband's from 2015. These days, Labour are wary of being so complacent. They've had a working manifesto ready to go for nearly 2 years now. Obviously, they keep amending it once they realise there's not going to be an election then. But it's always there. It's always ready. They were preparing for an election in 2022, thinking that Boris Johnson's downfall might have triggered a snap election. They've been in a state of readiness ever since. Because if Labour did allow themselves to believe this crap in the Tory client media, they wouldn't just be snookering themselves for the all-important election. They'd be failing to plan their own conference this October. And what's so important about conferences, apart from anything else, it brings in a lot of money. But the Tories are not planning an autumn election. They want May. It might be autumn if something stops them going in May, but they want May. The leadership wants not Theresa May, the election in May. It's best time to limit the damage for the Tories as a whole. For Sunak, going longer doesn't help him with the India trade deal. India has its own general election in May, so if a deal isn't agreed before their campaign begins, which is April, Modi will not have as much interest in it. So there's absolutely no reason for either Tory election strategists or Rishi Sunak personally to want an autumn general election. But there are pressures. Now that the Tories recognise they're going to lose, there are reports that many MPs, including some senior ministers, want to hang on to enjoy the gravy train a bit more. I saw a suggestion, I'm not sure how reliable this is, take it with a pinch of salt, that even some cabinet ministers are wanting to hold off so that they can keep their chauffeur-driven cars a few months longer. But although I've been saying for well over half a year now that I think May is the most likely date, it's still a political calculation. It's still a political calculation that hasn't been definitively made. And it's a political calculation made by people who have proven themselves to be really bad at political calculations. Their aim in the new year was to get people feeling good about the national insurance cuts and then keep the momentum going with further unfunded tax cuts in the March budget. Only the public didn't respond positively to the national insurance cuts. It's an obvious pre-election bribe. That is what it's been seen as. What's actually happened in the first 6 weeks of election year is Labour have extended their poll lead a little. The Tories wanted to bring it down a bit and then a bit more after the March budget and then more still during the election campaign. It's widening. It may go back down again at any time, but there's no sign that the Tories are going to eat into that roughly very sticky 20-point lead that's been around for over a year now. And if their tax cuts in March don't do the trick, if people are aware that taxes overall are still going up, what then? Because all the Tories really have is tax cuts. They're trying to focus people onto the economy and personal finances. And you might say, well, is this wise? Well, in isolation, no, because it's an absolute nightmare. But they've got nothing else. The economy, ironically, is the best platform on which they can campaign. Labour are even considered more likely to solve immigration issues than the Conservatives right now. But this Thursday could be huge in terms of the political calculations. Not so much the by-election. You may think, well, the by-elections are on Thursday. No, the Tories have already abandoned those. But on Thursday, we get the official GDP figures for December. Now, it is on a knife edge as to whether we find we hit technical recession or not. Frankly, the Tories are lucky that it is such a 50-50. They've deliberately encouraged the Bank of England last year to pursue a course of action which would bring inflation down even at the cost of growth. So a recession should have been an almost inevitable cost. But if the news on Thursday is that we do hit recession, could be a game changer, because a May 2nd election would mean Sunak will have to call the election whilst we're officially in recession. It will mean the election will take place whilst we're officially in recession. Because even if the current quarter is showing growth, which means we'll be out of recession, we won't find out until mid-May. So does Sunak dare call an election during a recession? Especially if a lot of Tory MPs are thinking, well, if they're going to lose anyway, can we hang on a few months to keep on the gravy train? But if the Tories panic and change their plans, they find themselves with a funding problem. Like I said earlier, the Conservative Party are going to struggle to elicit donations. That £10 million left in a will, that made their coffers swell a bit. It's a one-off. I want you to consider like 3 types of donor that the Tories have been attracting in recent years. The first is the genuine Conservative donor, right? They donate to the party because they want it to do well, just as I do to Labour, just as some of you do to your own parties. They don't ask or expect any personal favours. They just want to support their preferred party. Now, these donors will continue to donate, although maybe not as much as they have in the past if they think it's a bit of a waste. The second are those who want access to ministers. So they pay a lot of money and have lunch with a member of the government where they can basically lobby. They're not buying favours as such. There's no like underhand deals, but they're able to discuss policy with the people who make policy. These donors are less likely to donate because in a few months' time, if they want to have lunch with a minister, it won't be a Tory minister. The third type are the really very corrupt donors. Those are the ones who donate on the understanding it will result in quid pro quo favours. Maybe a seat in the House of Lords, maybe a lucrative government contract, maybe having their business interests enhanced via favourable legislation or budget decisions. Obviously, this third type of donor is very unlikely to sink their money into a doomed project because they see their donations as a financial investment. They expect a return. And if it's clear the Tories are going to lose, they won't get that return. You know, if it was a tight election, they might hedge. They might donate to both parties. But it doesn't look like a tight election. So it's hard to see how the Tories can draw in enough donations to maintain their current election spending until autumn. It's hard to see how it's credible. The other thing to consider is spending limits apply. Yes, the spending limits have massively increased for political parties, but there are still spending limits. And these limits apply for up to a year before the election is likely to take place. So basically, the Tories can't just write off any spending they're currently engaged in, even if they were to elicit a lot of donations, because the spending limits apply now. They apply 365 days before an election is likely to take place. So we're in that time now. It doesn't matter how long the Tories delay, we're within the last year of the election. That's clear. So spending limits now apply. So to go long, the Tories would realistically have to wind down some of their operations at campaign headquarters, as well as rein in their social media ad spending for a bit, both of which would be noticed. And then there's the final little wrinkle. So the Tories want to announce tax cuts in their budget next month. But doing that would break their fiscal rule that debt has to fall as a share of GDP over 5 years. As Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Laura Trott, found last week, the data shows that it will rise, and there's no way the data will say anything different anytime soon. So if Jeremy Hunt in his budget announces tax cuts, The OBR report that will accompany that budget will have to show that the Tories are implementing unfunded tax cuts, just like Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng did. And if they don't announce those tax cuts, a lot of Tory MPs who mistakenly think they need them to help them win their seats will be very unhappy. So although the Tories are committing spending to a May election and will have had to have wasted a lot of money if they then change course, there are headwinds. First, we might find ourselves in recession, which would attract incredibly damaging headlines, as well as Labour advertising campaigns. A bold move to call an election if you're in a recession. Second, the Tories may not be able to announce the tax cuts needed to satisfy their MPs. Third, if they go long, then a lot of their election level spending that's happening now will have to be basically written off, but it does reduce the amount they can spend when they start up again in late summer. It's a classic caught between a rock and a hard place. The combination of a recession and not announcing tax cuts or enough tax cuts risks the Tory strategy unravelling. So you'd think, well, surely they'll go wrong if it all starts going a bit askew and accept the wasted campaign spending so far. But then you've got that combination of recession and weakness on tax cuts putting Sunak's position under pressure. You know, can his government even last until autumn? Will his MPs even carry on supporting him until autumn if all they see is someone who's delivered recession, and even when we're out of recession, he will still have delivered recession and not giving them the tax cuts they want? But whichever way the political calculation jumps, I don't think it's going to be towards a polling recovery for the Tories. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.